The coffee was still hot when my phone rang. I remember that detail because I'd just poured it dark roast, no sugar, the same way I've had it every morning for the past 30 years. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my condo on the 14th floor, looking out at the Ottawa River, catching the early light, going through some paperwork from my accountant. Routine stuff. Quarterly summaries, a few adjustments to my investment portfolio. Nothing exciting, just the quiet, ordinary morning of a retired man who has finally learned to enjoy quiet, ordinary mornings. Then the phone rang, and the number on the screen stopped me cold. I hadn't seen that number in 4 years. 4 years, 2 months, and if I'm being exact about it, somewhere around 3 weeks. Not that I was counting. You stop counting after a while, because counting just keeps the wound open. You learn to set it down. Not forget it. Exactly. Just set it down somewhere you don't have to look at it every day. I stared at the screen for 3 full rings before I picked up. Dad, my son's voice. Deeper than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just forgotten what it sounded like. Liam, I said. That was all I said at first. Just his name. There was a pause on the line. The kind of pause that has too much weight in it. I need to talk to you about something. It's important. I almost said, most things are, when you haven't spoken to your father in 4 years. But I didn't. I kept my voice even. All right. Go ahead. Not on the phone. Another pause. Can we meet? This weekend, maybe? I looked at my coffee. Still steaming. Still hot. I can do Saturday, I said. I'll come to you. He gave me the address, a house in Canada, which surprised me. Last time I knew, he and his wife Bridget were renting a townhouse in Nepean. Canada was a step up. A significant step up. I wrote down the address. I said goodbye. I hung up. Then I sat there for a long moment, not drinking my coffee, looking at the river. What do you feel after a call like that? I'm still not sure I have the right word for it. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't that simple. It wasn't hope, exactly, though there was something in there that wanted to be hope. It was more like the feeling you get when you hear a sound in a part of the house you thought was empty. You don't know yet what made the noise. You just know that something has changed. I had been retired for 6 years by then. 31 years as a civil engineer, bridges, mostly, some municipal infrastructure, and then I walked away with a clean pension, a decent investment portfolio, and a plan to finally see the parts of the world I'd been too busy to visit. I sold the house in Barhaven where Liam grew up. Too much space for one person. Too many rooms that needed to stay closed. I bought the condo downtown. I started traveling 3 months of the year. Portugal, New Zealand, a month in the Scottish Highlands that I still think about when the Ottawa winter gets bad. I was, by any honest measure, doing well, which is maybe why, about a year before Liam's silence began, I'd done something I was proud of. I'd taken $120,000 and set up a bursary fund through the University of Ottawa, the Faculty of Engineering, for students from rural Ontario who couldn't otherwise afford the program. It was named after my late wife, Liam's mother, who passed when Liam was 22. She always said she wished she'd gone back to school. I wanted her name on something that helped people do exactly that. I posted about it on Facebook, not bragging, just sharing. I still had old colleagues and friends from the Barhaven days on there, people who knew her. It felt right to let them know. That was about a year before the silence started. I should have connected the dots sooner. When I thought about it later and I had 4 years to think about it, I realized the distance had crept in quietly, the way water gets into a foundation. First, it was fewer calls. Then calls that had an edge to them, conversations that felt like they were circling something they never quite landed on. Then one Christmas where Liam and Bridget said they'd be spending it with her family in Calgary. Then another Christmas the same way. Then a birthday call that didn't come. I reached out. Several times. Cards. Texts. One long email that I spent 3 evenings writing and editing, and that I'm fairly sure was never read. After 18 months of that, I stopped. You can only knock on a door so many times before you have to accept that no one inside wants to open it. So I lived my life. I traveled. I had lunch with old friends on Tuesday, volunteered with a Heritage Conservation Society on Thursday mornings, read more books than I ever had time for when I was working. I was, I think, genuinely all right. Not whole. Exactly, a father whose son has gone silent is never quite whole, but all right. And then Saturday came. and I drove out to Kanata. The house was a two-story detached on a quiet crescent, stone facade, double garage, a professionally landscaped front yard with those little Japanese maples that cost more than people think. Nice neighborhood? Very nice, actually. The kind of neighborhood where the houses are worth about $700,000, give or take. I sat in my car for a moment before going up to the door. I wanted to just take a breath, settle myself. Bridget answered before I'd even finished knocking. She was smiling, but it was the kind of smile that requires effort. You could see the effort if you looked for it. She had her hair done, a new style since the last time I'd seen her. She was dressed like she'd put thought into it. None of that is a criticism. I just noticed it. "Howard," she said, and gave me a careful hug. "Come in. Liam's in the living room." Howard. That's my name. Howard Brent Calloway, if you want the full version. Liam stood up when I came in. He'd put on some weight, filled out across the shoulders. He looked like a man in his mid-30s who'd been under steady stress for a while, the kind of tiredness that lives around the eyes. We shook hands, which felt strange and also correct, given everything. "Dad, thanks for coming." "Of course," I said. And then we sat down, and Bridget brought coffee, and there were about 4 minutes of small talk that nobody's heart was in. How was the drive? The neighborhood's good, isn't it? Yes, that maple out front is new. And then Liam leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said, "Dad, I'm going to get right to it." "Please do," I said. "I need to borrow $150,000. I need it within the next couple of weeks." I kept my face still. I've had a lot of practice keeping my face still. Engineering projects teach you that. Years of delivering bad news to clients and politicians who didn't want to hear it. "All right," I said. "Tell me what's going on." What came out over the next 20 minutes was this. Liam had, 3 years ago, gone in with 2 partners on a franchise investment. I won't say which franchise, it doesn't matter, and I don't want to disparage a brand over one bad outcome. The short version is that the location had underperformed from the beginning. There was a dispute with one of the partners that ended in a buyout that cost more than expected, and now Liam was personally on the hook for a significant portion of a business loan that the bank was calling in. The number he owed, personally and immediately, was $150,000. "I've been trying to figure it out on my own for the past 8 months," he said. "I've exhausted every other option. You're the last person I wanted to ask." I noticed he didn't say the last person he wanted to call. Just the last person he wanted to ask. "There's a difference." I said, "I appreciate you explaining that, and I can see this has been hard." I paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why 4 years, Liam?" He looked at Bridget. She looked at her coffee cup. Things got complicated," he said. "Life got busy." "Life got busy," I said. I didn't say it with much inflection, just enough to let the words exist in the room on their own. "I know that's not good enough," he said. "No," I said. "It isn't." We sat with that for a moment. Bridget still hadn't looked up. "Dad," Liam said, "I know the timing of this looks terrible. I know how it seems. But I'm in a genuinely bad place right now, and you're the only person who can help." I looked at my son. I thought about all the Christmases, all the unanswered texts, the email I'd spent 3 evenings writing. I thought about his mother, and the fact that he hadn't come home when she died, not in the dramatic way. She'd been gone for years by then, but in the quieter way, the way her absence was never something we'd grieve together. I thought about the bursary fund, and whether he'd ever said a word about it. "Liam," I said, "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without getting defensive, because I'm not saying it to hurt you." He nodded. 6 months after you stopped returning my calls," I said, "I spoke to a financial planner and a solicitor about my estate. I made some decisions about how I want my assets distributed. I made those decisions because I was planning for a future, and you weren't in communication with me, and a person in my position can't leave these things vague." I reached into my jacket and set a folder on the coffee table. I'd had it prepared by my solicitor 2 days after Liam's call. I hadn't told him I was bringing it. That was intentional. "What is that?" Bridget asked. She'd finally looked up. "A summary of my current estate arrangements," I said. I thought it was only fair that Liam understand the full picture before this conversation went any further. The full picture was this. 3 years ago, in addition to the bursary fund I'd already established, I had moved a substantial portion of my liquid assets into a charitable remainder trust again through the University of Ottawa, with a secondary beneficiary being a conservation land trust in the Ottawa Valley that my wife and I had supported together for years. The trust generated income for me, which I lived on comfortably, but the principal was committed. It was, in legal terms, no longer mine to hand out. I had also, quietly and with proper legal guidance, updated my will. My condo and my remaining personal assets were structured to pass to two charities on my death, with a modest bequest. I want to be fair, so I'll say it plainly, a modest bequest to Liam, contingent on certain conditions of contact being maintained. At the time I made those changes, I didn't make them out of anger. I made them because a man my age, with no spouse and an estranged child, has to think clearly about what happens to what he's built. I made them with a level head. My solicitor had asked me, more than once, if I was sure. I said yes each time. Liam read through the first 2 pages. His jaw tightened. Bridget read over his shoulder. Her expression shifted from polite tension to something harder and less polite. "You're telling me," Liam said slowly, "that you don't have the money." "I'm telling you that I don't have $150,000 sitting available to hand over," I said. "That's accurate. My income is comfortable. My capital is committed." "The condo," Bridget said. She said it quickly, like she'd had the thought prepared. "You could take out a line of credit against the condo. People do that." I looked at her calmly. "I'm aware that people do that," I said. "I'm not going to, Dad." Liam set the papers down. "This doesn't make sense. You've given away more than that to charity. You've given $120,000 to a university fund. You've got—" He glanced at the papers, over $200,000 in a trust. "You've been traveling around the world for 6 years, and you're telling me your own son can't get help when he's in genuine trouble?" "What I'm telling you," I said, "is that the arrangements I've made are the arrangements I've made. And I made them during the years you weren't speaking to me. I wasn't waiting for a crisis. I was living my life." Bridget set down her coffee cup with a small, hard click. "You did this on purpose," she said. I looked at her. "I made legal decisions about my own estate, fully within my rights to do so." "You set it up so there's nothing left for Liam when you're gone," she said. "You did that deliberately. Don't pretend it was just—" "Bridget," Liam said quietly. "No," she said. "He's sitting here with his little folder and his prepared speech like he planned this whole thing. And you went 4 years without your father, because of my family situations, because of my mother's health, because of things you don't know about. I reached out for 18 months, I said. I got no response. You could have tried harder." I let the silence sit for a moment. I've learned over the years that silence is sometimes the most honest thing you can say. "Howard," she tried again, softer this time. "We're not trying to take advantage of you. Liam is your son. He's in real trouble. Surely there's something—" "The bursary," I said. She blinked. "What?" "The bursary fund," I said, "in his mother's name. Liam, when I set it up, I posted about it on Facebook. I sent you an email explaining it. Did you see that?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said finally. "Did you say anything to me about it? At any point in 4 years?" He looked at the floor. That was my answer. I picked up my folder. I straightened the papers. I set it back in my jacket. "The trust can't be broken," I said. "That's actually by design, not to punish anyone, but because that's how charitable trusts work, and my solicitor can confirm it. What I have in personal income each month is what I live on, and it's enough for me and not enough to service a $150,000 debt." I stood up. "I'm sorry you're in this position, Liam. Genuinely. I hope you find a path through it." Liam stood up too. "Dad, I'm not angry with you," I said. And that was true. Something had passed through me, sitting in that living room, some last hope, maybe, that hadn't been completely extinguished until that moment. But it wasn't anger. It was something quieter. A door closing gently instead of being slammed. "I'm not angry. I'm just clear." I shook his hand again. I nodded to Bridget. I walked out to my car, and I drove back downtown. And the whole way back, I didn't turn on the radio. I just drove. That was a Saturday in March. The following Monday, my phone rang again. It was Bridget this time, not Liam. She said there were things she wanted to say to me that she hadn't been able to say in front of Liam. I told her calmly that if she wanted to talk, Liam was welcome to call me. I wasn't interested in separate negotiations. She said some things after that, her voice tight, controlled, the way people sound when they're working very hard, not to say the worst version of what they're thinking. I let her finish. Then I said, "I hope things work out, Bridget," and I hung up. My solicitor called me that afternoon. She'd received a call from someone she wouldn't say from whom, but I could guess, making inquiries about whether a charitable remainder trust could be challenged in court. She wanted me to know. "Can it be?" I asked. "Not on these facts," she said. "The trust was established legally, while you were fully competent, more than 2 years ago. There's no grounds. I just wanted you to be aware." I thanked her. I hung up. I made myself dinner that night, pasta with a sauce I make from scratch, the way my wife taught me, with the good canned tomatoes from the Italian grocery on Preston Street. I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for something. I sat at the table by the window and watched the evening come down on the river. I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, exactly. More like the particular peace that comes when something that has been unresolved for a very long time is finally, quietly resolved. I want to be honest about something here, because I think it matters, and I think some of you will understand it. I didn't make those estate decisions to get back at my son. I made them because I had to make them, because he wasn't there, and because a person my age learns eventually that the only estate planning that actually protects you is the kind you do when you're thinking clearly and not under emotional pressure. My solicitor told me that more than once. It turns out she was right. But I also want to be honest about this. When I set up the charitable remainder trust, part of me knew, not consciously, maybe, but somewhere underneath that, it was also protection. Not from my son specifically. From exactly this kind of situation. The situation where someone comes back not because they want a relationship, but because they want a number, and they need your affection to be the lever that gets it for them. A friend of mine, a retired family physician named Suzanne, who I'd known since our kids were in primary school together, told me something once that I've thought about a lot in the months since. She said, "Howard, the hard thing about loving children is that you spend 20 years building them into their own people, and then you spend the rest of your life reckoning with what that means when the person they are doesn't look the way you hoped." I thought about that on the drive to Canada. I thought about it again on the drive home. Liam did call, eventually. About 6 weeks after the Saturday meeting, he called on a Sunday morning, which felt intentional, softer, less confrontational than a weekday. He said he was calling to apologize. Not for asking about the money, he said, but for the 4 years. He said some things had happened during that time, some pressures around Bridget's family, some things that were harder to talk about than he'd made them seem, and that he hadn't handled it well. And he knew that. I listened to all of it. I didn't say it was fine, because it wasn't. But I also didn't say it was unfixable, because I wasn't sure of that either. I said I appreciated the call. I said I'd like to have lunch sometime, just us, without an agenda. He said yes. We had that lunch. It was in April, at a small restaurant on Elgin Street that we used to go to when he was in university. It was not a perfect lunch. There were long pauses and careful sentences and things that were hovering above the table without quite landing. But we ate, and we talked about things that weren't the money. And when we left, we stood on the sidewalk for a moment, in that particular way of people who aren't sure how to end something. He reached out and hugged me. I hugged him back. I don't know what comes after that. I'm not sure anyone can know, after 4 years of distance, and one very difficult Saturday in Canada. Trust doesn't come back all at once. It comes back, if it comes back the way light changes in early spring. Slowly, and then a little faster, and then one morning you notice the difference without quite knowing when it happened. What I do know is this. I made the choices I made. I did the planning I did. I arranged my affairs in a way that lets me live with dignity and generosity on my own terms, and no one can take that from me. My wife's name is on a bursary that sends engineering students to university who couldn't afford to go. Young people I'll never meet are studying in her memory, and they'll build things with what they learn, and those things will last. There is, if you're looking for it, a certain kind of wealth in that, the kind that doesn't require an heir. I finished the wine that night by the window. The river was dark and moving. The city was quiet, the way Ottawa gets quiet on a weekday evening, not empty, just settled. I went to sleep early. I slept well. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened in that living room in Canada. Not to replay it looking for things I should have said differently. I'm past that age. But to understand it, to trace the line from cause to effect the way you'd trace a crack in a foundation, following it back to where the ground first shifted. Here's what I keep coming back to. The choices we make when no one is watching, when there's no immediate pressure, when it's just us, and a quiet evening, and a decision that doesn't seem urgent, those are the ones that actually determine how things unfold years later. I didn't set up that trust fund because I anticipated a confrontation with my son. I did it because it was the right arrangement for a man in my situation, at that point in my life, thinking clearly. I did it because my wife deserved to have her name on something lasting. I did it because I had spent 31 years building things meant to last, and I wasn't about to stop in retirement. The consequences of that, the fact that when Liam came to me with his hand out, I had something honest to show him, instead of a difficult conversation, I was making up on the spot that wasn't luck. That was what happens when a person does their quiet work faithfully over time. I think about Liam too. Not with bitterness. I want to be clear about that. But I think about what 4 years of distance cost him, not just the inheritance question, which is the obvious thing, but the smaller things. The Christmases. The phone calls that would have been easy and weren't made. The Sunday mornings when a son could have called his father and didn't. Those years don't come back. That's not punishment. It's just how time works. It moves in one direction. What you don't tend to, you lose. What you neglect long enough starts to grow over. And Bridget, sitting across that coffee table, trying to find an angle, I don't think she's a bad person. I think she's someone who learned to see the world as a series of problems to be solved through leverage. And she applied that approach to a situation where it simply didn't work. You can't leverage a man who has already made peace with his circumstances. There's nothing to grip. What I want to say, and I'm not sure I have the right words for it, but I'll try, is that integrity isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's the thing you build slowly, decision by decision, year by year, in the ordinary moments when you could cut a corner and no one would know. It's the email you write for 3 evenings, even if it's never opened. It's the bursary fund you set up, even when your son isn't speaking to you. It's the appointment with the solicitor you keep, not out of spite, but because you owe it to yourself to think clearly. The outcome of my Saturday in Kanata wasn't determined in that living room. It was determined over years of quiet, unglamorous choices that I made when I was alone. That's what I'd want anyone to take from this, if anything. Your life is being shaped right now by the small things you're doing or not doing when no one is watching. The rest tends to follow.